The real key with spraying docks is you want to target them at the right size. You want to get them when they're 8 to 10 inches higher across. And this is what we call the rosette stage, when they're green and healthy. But this then gives the best opportunity for whatever spray you use to get taken into the plant and go down and kill the root.
Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan and I'm joined by Chris Maughan, Product and Technical Manager with Whelehan Crop Protection, to discuss weed control on grazing paddocks and silage ground. Chris, you're very welcome. It has been a dry spring on farms this spring in comparison to other years until recently, and many farmers are looking to get an opportunity to control weeds, particularly in silage ground and grazing paddocks. What's the best time to control docks?
Yes, Catherine, look, it's probably coming to an ideal time of the year now for controlling docks, especially in silage grounds, the end of April, early May. Look, a lot of the fertiliser has been spread with the early spring we've had. It's done a number of weeks ago. The harrowing and rolling is done. And the grass is coming now, but as normal, lots of weeds and docks come through as well. So it's come to an ideal time now for spraying them. I suppose the real key with spraying docks is you want to target them at the right size. You want to get them when they're 8 to 10 inches higher across. And this is what we call the rosette stage, when they're green and healthy. But this then gives the best opportunity for whatever spray you use to get taken into the plant and go down and kill the root.
And after spraying, how long after can you wait until cattle are allowed graze it again? Or if it's been cut for silage, how long have you to wait before it can be cut?
Generally, most products, you generally have to wait about 7 days afterwards for grazing. However, with silage, we like to leave it longer, especially when you're using systemic products like Dockstar Pro. We like to leave it about 3 weeks from the time you spray to when you cut your silage. And this is to allow time for the chemical to get into the plant, get taken down and kill out that root. Now, it may be the case that the silage starts to grow quick and you have to cut that a little bit earlier, maybe after 10 days. There's not an issue with that. What tends to happen, you may get more regrowth later on because you haven't left it long enough for the chemical to get down and kill out the root.
And from your experience, what would you see as the best product for using for controlling docks, be it on grazing ground or on silage?
Yeah, look, I suppose silage ground, the ideal product there for use would be something like Dockstar Pro. It not only controls docks, which would be the main one you're after, but also dandelions. They're starting to come into flower now at the moment. And chickweed is good in those weeds. And one of the key things with Dockstar Pro is it's also very safe on the grass. A lot of people don't want to stunt the grass now, especially with this good warm week we're having. This week they'll want grass to grow. Dockstar Pro generally is used at half rate. If you apply that in your silage ground now, it will not stunt the grass or stop the grass from growing. So that's important. And when you go to grazing ground, then it's generally 4 front tees. The ideal product for using there will control docks, and not alone docks, but also other weeds. Then it's very broad spectrum, and it's an ideal product for using in grazing paddocks.
And obviously nettles and thistles are possibly some of the most common weeds on farms. What's the best control method for those?
Yeah, look, thistles are becoming more of a problem, especially over the last number of years. There's 2 main types of thistle. You have the creeping thistle, which tend to grow in clumps in the field, has a massive root structure. But you also have the spear thistle, which grows as an individual plant. And a lot of farmers may see this growing under fence lines and stuff. Look, the creeping thistle, ideally you want to be spraying them when they're 6 to 8 inches high. They're probably only starting to come up now in lots of ground and stuff. During the month of May, you'll start to see them coming up. Thistlex is an ideal product of choice there. It'll do a really good job on Thistlex, but 4 front T is quite good on thistles too.
And do you think, should they be cut prior to spraying, or at what stage should they be sprayed?
Yeah, look, as I was saying, you want to be targeting them when they're 6, maybe to 10 inches high. That's the ideal timing. You generally wouldn't top them, at this time of the year, but certainly in the summertime, you get into June or July and thistles start growing above your knee, or they start to be in flower. At that stage, they're really too big for the chemicals to work. So you would top them at that stage, and then you would let them regrow and target them maybe 3 to 4 weeks after you would top them. That's probably the best approach for controlling them then later on in the year.
And you mentioned earlier chickweed. It's also an issue on some farms and maybe more possibly in new type leys. What would you advise for controlling chickweed?
Yeah, look, common chickweed can be a problem on many farms, even in silage ground or established ground, established grazing ground. Look, it can totally smother out the grass and stuff like that, and a lot of lads want to get rid of it. Dockstar Pro is an ideal product of choice there for using it. If you're controlling your docks and your dandelions, it'll control the common chickweed. But we do have a specialist product called Envy, which is really good at controlling chickweed, but it also gets that mouse ear chickweed, which can has a little white flower also and can be quite prevalent in lots of grazing ground and silage ground. So that's quite good at controlling both the mouse ear chickweed and the common chickweed.
Chris, every year advisors highlight the most important part of a reseed is the post-emergence spray. You've witnessed firsthand where this is not done. What happens?
Yeah, look, it certainly can. If the weed control is not done correctly, it can cause huge problems. Something like common chickweed, like we mentioned there, can be devastating to newly sown leys. It can smother out the grass, the new little grass seedlings totally. Then what that does, it leaves bare patches, which allows perennial weeds like docks and thistles and stuff to grow then afterwards. But not alone, chickweed, red shank, red nettle, fat hen, some of these soft weeds can also smother out the grass seedlings. So it is important to control the weeds early. And really, the best time for controlling weeds in a new sown ley is in about 4 to 6 weeks after you reseed. When the weeds are small, you target them at that stage. But it's also a very good time for controlling perennial weeds like docks. If you want to kill out a dock and prevent it from growing on your farm for a number of years, it's much easier to kill a dock when it's grown from seed early on. You kill out the dock, and then you good grassland management afterwards allows it'll keep the field dock free, I suppose is what I'm trying to say, for the next number of years.
And last week, Mary mentioned the inclusion of clover in new swards in the mixes. What products would you be advising, particularly where clover is sown in a reseed?
Yeah, look, where white clover needs to be retained, we have a new product which was launched in the market last year called Prolo XL. That's probably the ideal product of choice. It can be used in both new sown leys and established grassland. It can control a wide range of those soft weeds that I mentioned: chickweed, red shank, fat hen, red dead nettle. It controls a wide range of those soft weeds, but it also controls the perennial weeds like docks and dandelions and buttercups. So it's an ideal product of choice to target in your new sown ley then, where clover needs to be retained.
Chris, in relation to red clover and multi-species swards, we've seen them grow in popularity in the last number of years. What advice have you for controlling weeds in these type swards?
Yeah, look, it's more difficult to get chemicals to be used in both red clover and multi-species. Clover XL can be used in red clover swards, but it must be overwintered. So if you sowed a red clover sward last year, you can spray Clover XL in it this year. But if you sow a red clover sward this spring, you cannot use Clover XL in it. The red clover is much more sensitive to a lot of these sprays than white clover, so it needs to be overwintered. Unfortunately, there's nothing for use in multi-species. We don't recommend to use Clover XL there because it will kill out the plantain and chickweed. It's very difficult to get a spray that's safe on all the different components of the multi-species. I suppose the real important thing there is when you're sowing a multi-species is when you're using glyphosate is to leave it a number of weeks to allow it to kill out the perennial weeds that are there and grass weeds that are there, but also maybe control those perennial weeds like docks and thistles the year before you sow the multi-species. So that'll reduce the amount of those weeds coming from root structures.
That's great, Chris. And ragwort is something that's becoming more of an issue on farms. What's the best control option?
Yeah, look, it can be a big problem on farms. There's two, I suppose, chemical controls for controlling ragwort. You've got 2,4-D and 4,4-T. Look, a ragwort is a biannual plant. So in the first year, it'll grow as a small little rosette. It overwinters, and then the second year, it flowers out. So sometimes controlling those rosettes in the autumn time can work quite well, late on the year. But the springtime then is probably when a lot of it is done, is at this time of the year. But the one thing to remember is with ragwort, when you spray it with a chemical, it becomes palatable, and as the sugars break down and the plant dies, and the animals would eat it. So it is really important that if you do spray ragwort, that you leave it until the ragwort is totally dead and decayed. And that could take a minimum of maybe 3, 4, even 5 or 6 weeks. So it's important to target it when the plant is small, so it has a better chance of dying. in a shorter space of time. So if you get late into May or into June, it tends to get very late for controlling ragwort then with either 2,4-D or 4,1-T.
Thanks, Chris. And in relation to rushes, what are the main strategies for controlling them?
Yeah, look, rushes can be very difficult to control. Ideally, you'd like to cut them and then spray the regrowth afterwards. I know a number of people have probably had an opportunity this year to do that with the dry spring we've had, because if they have a thick, waxy leaf, it's very difficult for the chemical to get in through it. So cut the rushes if you can, and then spray them maybe 4 to 6 weeks later. And we'd also recommend maybe use a sticker, something like torpedo, and that helps the droplets stick to the rush plant and penetrate in through that waxy leaf.
And finally, Chris, with all sprays that you've mentioned there throughout the podcast, what's the recommendation in relation to the sprayer use?
Number one, I suppose when you're using chemicals, it is important to read the label first, in terms of the spray operator, he does need to be qualified to use the spray operator, whether that's a knapsack or a boom sprayer. The sprayer itself does need to be tested, so it is important to get that. Every 3 years, the sprayer needs to be tested. It's also important for farmers to leave a buffer zone when using any spray that's a zone between where you spray and maybe a watercourse, and that is a minimum of 3 meters must be left between the edge of the field where you spray and a watercourse. And I suppose ideally farmers should be using low drift nozzles when they're spraying a lot of these grassland products. They have a number of advantages. Number one, they'll reduce the drift, but also they tend to produce a slightly larger droplet size, which then when it hits the plant has a better chance of sticking to the plant and giving better coverage. So the use of a low drift nozzle would be advisable, certainly with products like Prolo XL and Dockstar Pro. It's what we would recommend.
Health and safety around the use of sprays and also in relation to the storage of the sprays is very important.
All sprays must be kept and stored in the original container, and certainly in a locked part of the farm, in a cabinet or something in a farm.
That's great. Thanks very much, Chris.
Okay, thank you.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Chris for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan and thanks for listening.